I'm Julie Wilkinson, and I'm the owner and founder of Wilkinson Accounting Solutions, and I'm your host of the Build and Exit podcast. Today, I'm excited to have Michèle Hecken with me. Hi, Michèle.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for having me. I'm excited too, across the big pond.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to have you because a bit of background about the show. We talk about topics of acquisitions, exit planning, and ultimately my mission is to help people maximize their wealth on exit. Because I don't think, especially here in the UK, I think we're quite behind on exit planning. So I know you're going to have a really great story to share about how you actually had a successful exit where you built a good asset. But first of all, I just want to hand over to you to introduce yourself and talk a bit about, why you wanted to come on the podcast.
Awesome, Julie. Thank you. It's funny because I referenced the big pond and how we're connecting, and that really is how my journey started. So I'm a serial entrepreneur, CEO, author, and speaker. I built a company from scratch in my early 20s that was global from day one. I sold that in 2019. I know, Julie, you're excited to dig into how I did that and what I did. And today I'm an advisor to high-performing leaders and entrepreneurs who want to scale their company, create more value for a potential exit without burning themselves out working 60 hours a week or something crazy like that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's going to be really good. That's one of the reasons I wanted you to come on the show because I'm not, obviously, I think you're a bit further ahead probably in the US than the UK. But the thing I see with the amount of buyers I speak to and sellers and the issues that arise at the acquisition stage. And if I'm honest, it's normally the seller that loses out at the minute because the business just isn't trading, I suppose, as an asset. So, I mean, we call it more as it's trading more of a lifestyle business than sort of like an asset because the business is quite reliant on the owner. And sometimes the owner doesn't know that because they're making a good wage or good salary from that job and they have done for years. And, they might feel they're financially free. But actually, when you look at the nuts and bolts of how the business is running, it is often too reliant on them. And then questions and problems start arising once they get to that point of sale. And I know that your journey that you're going to share with us today, you sort of built that asset and only worked for a lot of years, actually about 15 years, wasn't it? About 4 to 10 hours a week in the business.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I worked 4 to 10 hours a week on the business, not even in it. I was doing the stuff that I really, really love, right? Yeah. And you're absolutely right, Julie. So many entrepreneurs are in that boat. I mean, when we start up a company, we're doing everything because we have to, right? We're inventing it. We're basically driving the car while we're building it. And we know everything about the business. And it's really hard for a lot of entrepreneurs and owners to then realize when the business grows to the next stage that we need to also become somebody else. We need to change our job description. We need to let go and utilize our team. And it's very hard for a lot of people. And when that comes together with an exit, the company acquiring is going to have way more work integrating, way more work understanding, coaching. So they typically want the owner to stay on as long as possible. And it can lessen the value of an exit of an offer. And it also often comes with earnouts, which, I'm not a big fan of because they don't typically benefit the seller to be in a position where the rest of their payout for what they've built, some of them over a lifetime, is contingent on things that often they can't control.
Yeah, and I think it'd be good to sort of go through the journey because from my perspective as well, I mean, I'm obviously a business owner. I mean, I'm 4 to 5 years into my journey and I would say I probably work like you in the business, I probably only work probably similar, like 5 to 10. I probably work though in total about 30 hours a week, which I still think is relatively good for the journey that I'm on, like how early in the journey I am, considering it was only last year I actually acquired another business as well. So we've actually only brought our team in the last 18 months. I'm not fully at that place yet, but I'm going on that journey myself. So I think it'd be interesting to start back at the beginning when you started the business and how you, because I'm interested as well, actually, from my own, see it from somebody else's point, like how you went about sort of building it in stages to get to the point where you didn't work in it. So how did it all start?
Absolutely. So it all started. So I'm in Canada now, but it did start on the other side of the pond. So I'm half German and half Canadian, and my dad was German, my mom Canadian. So we moved back and forth all the time. So I grew up fully bilingual, also fully culturally bilingual, having lived and really immersed and understood the culture of both countries. And I was translating for my mom, who didn't speak German very well, in the grocery store at 3. So, I mean, becoming and starting a translation business later in my life was kind of following that path of where my gifts already were. So I started the company. And I mean, you're a woman, you're a business owner. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are as well. I knew nothing about business. I know I said, okay, I built all these systems, which I did. But when I started my business, I was like 23, really young. When we moved to Canada, I was 25. I had 2 kids under 3, but I had an amazing idea. So this is how it all started, Julie. At that time, this was pre-internet for those listeners who even can imagine what that used to be like. But there was an amazing new invention called the fax machine, and we were all blown away. And so I had one client in Germany that I did translations for, and I told them that we were moving to Canada with the family, and they're like, oh no, we really like your services. And I said, no, this is even better because I'm now 8 hours behind. So when you leave the office, you can fax me your translation. And by the way, this was at a time where most of my competitors, translators, were still typewriting and mailing translations to clients. So I used that time difference, and I've always called it my purple cow after Seth Godin because nobody was doing it. So I've always had a knack for doing the impossible, for shifting paradigms, for doing things completely differently. And my clients were in Germany and I was in Canada. I didn't know anybody other than my mom and my parents. I didn't know anything about business. I started a global company with a fax machine, and everybody told me I was absolutely crazy. I heard it all. It's like, oh, that's really nice that you have a little side job while being a mom. That way you have something to do. But here's the thing, your business will never succeed if you don't give it your 100%. And if you do that, and I heard these words almost verbatim, if you do that, you're going to be a bad mom and a bad parent. And I loved both. I loved being a mom, but I didn't want to be a full-time mom. It was not enough. I wanted to do something else. I had a vision and I wanted to grow the business. But at that point, I was working 20-hour days. So from somebody who now says I worked 4 to 10 hours a week, of course, at the beginning, I did not. I poured my heart and soul into this, and it was 20-hour days, and I was getting burnt out. And one night, I was waiting for the fax transmission of my translation to go through to Germany. I listened to my answering machine, and I got fired by my doctor, my hairdresser, and my friend was really concerned about me. And at that moment, that's when I realized if I don't make a change, first of all, these naysayers are going to be right. And I didn't want that. And I was being fired from my life in that moment because I had no control. And then I realized, wow, if I keep going like this, my kids might fire me from their lives one day, and I did not want that. So that was really the beginning of what I now call my offboarding journey, getting me out of the business, getting me out from translating 20 hours a day, getting me out from then proofreading 20 hours a day. It was a bit from the frying pan into the fire at first, but I put systems in place. I grew people. I focused that that's what it was about. And so after about a year of starting doing that, I changed my title to become Chief Revenue Officer because I needed to communicate that. So it was that was where it all started, the journey back, this crazy 25-year-old thinking she can conquer the world.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think a lot of people start with a story. I suppose you change everything based on the experiences that you have. I mean, for me, so I launched my business in 2020, just before COVID hit. So officially, I actually left my job in 2019. So I worked 20 years in corporate, and then I left my job in 2019. But I did some consulting then, and I officially made the decision around the December 19 to go, right, that's it. I'm not going to sort of do a 5-day contract anymore. I'm going to launch the business. And obviously the dreaded C happened. But I spent about 2 years researching. So I did about 15 CFO placements or consultancies for the first couple of years. Anyway, eventually it was around about mid 22 that I decided what I was going to do. And that's when I started hiring the major parts of the team and moving forward. And I always had in my mind, as I did that growth, that I didn't really want to work in the business. So I had to put a lot of hours in because, like you say, you have to work in the business. But I think a lot of my time, I probably did even more hours because I did the work and then I was working to get the other things set up so that eventually my time would reduce. And then the realization came to me, I think it was Jan last year. So that would have been sort of Jan 23. I actually started to be able to have like holidays and stuff where I didn't work because over time, bearing in mind, I didn't do the acquisition until March 23, but even in Jan 23, I'd set it up enough so at the level of work we had at that time, I didn't have to work fully. And at that point, I was starting to go on holidays without having to do a lot of work. And I became quite ill on that holiday, not like seriously ill, but like, when it all comes out. And then I actually got home from that holiday. It was a bit of a holiday of a lifetime for us. And that was my realization, because my realization when I went on holiday is I still wasn't present. That even though I didn't actually have to work, I suppose I wasn't bored on holiday, but my mind couldn't switch off. And I realized I was never truly present. So that sort of took me on a bit of a well-being journey, I suppose, as well. Not just a business journey, but a bit of a well-being journey. But that's kind of like where my realization starts. So then when you say that, I was getting fired from my life. I suppose mine was similar. No one had sort of said it to me, but I came to myself. So what sort of steps did you start putting in place so that you could move away?
Yeah, absolutely, Julie. And I believe what you said is true for a lot of entrepreneurs, right? The first time after the hustle and the grind and the setup, and it's a creation process. It's like giving birth to something new that only exists because you exist, right? And it's hard. And that realization when they go away the first time, or, where it's not so positive, they get ill, right? And they realize it still runs without me. And that little taste of freedom and freedom from guilt also, right? Because we're often told we got to work really, really hard and we got to do the same thing that everybody else is doing. That's what people often think is leading by example. And then when they can let go, they realize, oh, my team can actually handle this. So thanks for sharing that, Julie. I think that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with, but also have that realization. It's like, oh, whoa, this does actually work without me, right? So the steps that I took, first of all, I was a fantastic translator. And I had studied law and some other things, obviously languages and art and political science, because I was just interested in a lot of things. But the legal part was really important for my translation because I worked with big law firms. Okay. So it was not like, oh, here's a little translation that nobody cares about. These were multi-million-dollar deals. So there was a lot at stake. And when you work with law firms, like, you don't want to send them something that's not right, because not just clients that you could lose, but their power, right? There's a lot of stake. So it was at the beginning difficult to say, I'm going to actually train a team to do the translation, so it's not me, right? And we always had one motto, or I had one motto, is like, we don't say no to clients. If there's a translation coming in, we will make sure it works. So at some point I had to outsource a little bit because the only option was to say no to the client, and I wasn't going to do that. It was always yes, right? So I had already kind of dipped my toes in, but after that night, I'm like, okay, well, if this project works and I'm proofreading and editing, then it's still my kind of stamp and language and tone on it. So now I could increase my volume. I could 10x my volume. didn't really change my time issue because now I was proofreading 20 hours a day, right? Because the volume had increased. But what that showed me is that the sales were there, the clients were there, and that I actually could easily scale. So these were all freelancers. And early on, I had a couple that I trained, giving them feedback. So really that training and coaching is important in any company, right? Sometimes we hear, oh, we got to work on our business, and then we start abdicating, and then, we come back in and we start micromanaging because we're scared, because we abdicated and we didn't train and we didn't coach and we didn't put systems in place, right? So that's often the struggle, where people kind of get out, but then they get right back in a total panic a couple of months later, and then they really mess everything up, right? Because they're sticking their fingers into everything. So that's really important, no matter what business that you're in. It's not something that happens overnight, but it's a goal that you can break down in small chunks. So then I started taking some of my best translators and having them proofread. And so having them added, and then I would, check and still coach. So it took some time, but eventually I was just focusing on bringing in revenue, because all these translators were all over the world, different cultures, different time zones, different languages, and they were all freelancers. So if I didn't feed them with consistent work, they would get work from somewhere else, and I needed to count on my team. So there was a lot of things at play when I really didn't know how business worked, but I just kind of went with, well, what makes sense, right? What do I need to do to get to my, and at that point, 10 hours a week was not the goal. The goal was just to be able to have dinner with my kids and read them a bedtime story, right? But then once you get on it and you realize and you put more systems in place, that the value that we bring as entrepreneurs is to grow revenue, to grow people, right? To build an amazing culture. So we're growth agents. And if we're spending an hour of our time that we could pay somebody, $50 or £50 or $100 or whatever it is for, how much value are we creating for the business at that 1 hour of our time, instead of maybe coaching the sales team on how to close better? Because now that might bring you $10,000 in your hour that you're spending. So realizing that shift as to how much more impact I could make if I didn't translate. That shift where I realized, if I grow revenue that feeds my team who are doing a great job, then that adds more value. So it was really about recognizing that paradigm shift from how much value am I creating in the business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds really, because it's interesting about the service. So, a lot of people, especially in service-based industries, a lot of them do say, oh, the business is me, the client wants me. Well,
they always say that, Julie. They always say that.
I know.
I cannot step away from clients. Absolutely. It's just a mindset. It's not.
But it's a mindset thing, because in 2023, when we did our acquisition, so we did an asset sale. So we probably did one of the hardest acquisitions, because we brought 100 clients off a retiring accounting firm and didn't bring over the owners. So when we did that acquisition, we were told, so they used to drive to the clients' houses and they used to have a cup of tea, and they used to sign off the accounts. They had no systems. It was all paper-based. We were told nobody wants to go to systems. And obviously it was all based on the relationship, which it was, because they had good relationships with the clients. So obviously that was a really hard thing to deal with, because not only, obviously they were still there in the background supporting, passing information and things like that, but they wasn't on the front line actually servicing the clients. So we actually did it all in one go. We took 100 clients and we moved them away from 2 owners or co-owners that had dealt with the guy, and we just took it on day one and just dealt with it. And we've retained 95% of those clients. We've never really visited any of them in person. We have some of them. It's not so much that we wouldn't, it's because it's unnecessary, because we've done surveys and we've asked them, like, where does the value come? And the value didn't always come from the fact that they got visited. The value comes from them understanding the account. So we've tried to listen over the period of time. And obviously we're a lot more, we're fully paperless. And yeah, we've still retained 95% of those clients. I mean, it's nearly fully paid now. By next year we would have had it 2 years, and that's the deal done as such. And we still retain 95%. So it just goes to show that it's just not true that the service relies on a person, because if you can take 100 clients and you can not bring them on and you can just still service them, obviously it was hard, I won't lie. But that just shows that it isn't always about the person. And so then people say to me, oh, well, people, because even sometimes the team have said to me that they want to work for you, but it's not really true, because I'm still the face probably of the marketing, is the truth, because we're still in that journey. However, we have a CRM tool. I have a social media assistant. I have a group CFO that manages the consultancies, and we have actively had people come through the door as a lead that haven't spoken to me, that's gone straight to the team, who have closed the client and then dealt with them, and I haven't been involved at all. Not in every scenario, because sometimes it depends on the client, but and then they've then upsold and continued that relationship, and that's just like their client now. So we're kind of like been going through that journey. So I think that myth of it has to be me, I think is a bit of a myth in the mindset of the person. Not really the reality. And obviously, yes, you can't just go, oh, off you go, then you go, and like you were coaching the coaches, you can't just let them go off. You obviously have to put that process in place. But once you put it in place, it can be done.
Absolutely. And you're so right. If you could take a company in the service business that has clients that are used to seeing the owners one-on-one. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's a better example to bust that myth. It's a story we tell ourselves, right? Because as we build a team, we have to start letting go, and we need to start letting go. That's a challenge on its own. But there's also a little bit of ego involved. I mean, we all have ego, right? Even if we're the most kind soul in the world, we have ego to protect us. It's who we are. And all of a sudden, we can see that, oh, it's not about me, right? Because I'll tell you, when I used to go to Germany, and visit my clients and kind of get appointments and grow the business, it was amazing, because I was young, in my 20s. They rolled out the red carpet because, the CEO is coming from Canada. When you're coming somewhere from somewhere else, people will meet with you, right? Because it's special. I'm here from then to then, and they will make time in their calendar. And I had such great relationships. Like, they'd roll out, oh, she's coming from Canada just to see us, right? So they were flattered. I was flattered. And then letting go of that and not having that, oh, Michelle's coming, here's the red carpet. There's a little bit of ego involved in letting go of that, right? And like many entrepreneurs, I'm just going to throw this in as a side, because we're talking about how did I do it? There's a really important component of being completely honest with yourself and recognizing, is that ego, and is it serving my business? Because here's the thing. You can wake me up in the middle of the night, give me a couple minutes, well, maybe it's a little longer these days, but back then, a couple of minutes to put my makeup on, and you'd put me in front of the client, and that would be great. And they would try our services for the most part. But I was terrible at follow-up. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are, right? Our job is to grow revenue, but we don't want to follow up and do all of these things. So the first step I did to kind of bring myself out of that relationship is I hired a salesperson and took them with me. So I still went. I took the salesperson with me, introduced them to the client, built the relationship. So now I was able to come in and coach the new salesperson real time. They could listen to me, how I interacted with the client, and they built the relationship. And so then I could go away. I could touch base once a quarter, right? So I still got that little bit of ego thing, that little bit of, ooh, I'm still important, which is silly, but we all have it, especially if we, birthed a company from nothing. But it was all about scaling, right? If I had a bigger team, we could get more clients, we could follow up with more clients. And so that was the step on the sales, where even later on, when I just do some, hi, good to see you again visits, I always had the salespeople with me, and I would sit there, and they had a better relationship with the salespeople than I did. So there's a lot that we can do as the owner to not fall into that trap. The clients always just want to see me, because there's ways to do that where you can explain and say, you know what, you have growing needs. If it all hinges on me, I'm not going to be able to serve you as well. So here's what I'm doing for you. So there's different ways to kind of get around that, because sometimes just saying, oh, that's not true, isn't enough for us to act on it.
Yeah, and I think because, like you said about not paying, I mean, it is the interest, it is the mindset of people sometimes about what they can afford, and the belief in themselves sometimes, maybe, or the belief in what they're doing, because some people are just so stuck in their day to day that they're not seeing the future. And
Exactly.
I've done a bit of a similar journey to you, I suppose. Is I've like sort of, I suppose, bringing people along the journey with me. So investing in the different people, getting them to like
Yeah.
replicate what I'm doing, but putting the processes in place. And that's why, so when we work with businesses on a finance, we focus a lot on governance and controls. And we've probably brought this from a corporate structure, because the reality is, unless a business owner has worked in a corporate company, they don't actually know the structure. And although I'm not saying corporate companies are always run necessarily really well, they do have a good structure that SMEs can follow. And I think one of the biggest ones is corporate governance. And people get scared about that terminology. Oh, it's too big for me. But all it actually means is, how is your decision matrix in the company? Because in the end, if you have enough controls across the processes and enough individuals involved, you can have enough steps interim that there'd be no significant, because what you've got to look at is, what is my biggest error or my biggest risk that can happen? And I suppose in the end, that's something happening with the customer, isn't it? And what can I do
Sometimes.
internally to mitigate those risks from that happening? And then you might have 3 different people in a process, that then have different roles and responsibilities in the process, that would then be verifying other information. And as long as you have the right checks in place, that's how we help businesses transition their business more to an asset. Because in the end, as long as the owner can relieve those tasks, risk of error and fraud, that will allow them to have more confidence that they can do it. And that's the biggest thing, is because we find 2 things happen. Either they don't relieve anything, and basically they get stuck, because there will be an element where the growth just can't carry on, because they will get too busy at a point in time. So either they get stuck at a point, or they start trying to release the task, like you said earlier, but then it goes wrong. And now they're even worse off, because now they've got more customers that they can handle, but they don't have any processes that they can follow.
Right. And people often forget that, like, it's growth, it's revenue. And even nowadays, where we see, like, I'm a coach, right? I'm an advisor. I have a social presence. But what a lot of people don't see is, you have to still be able to service the clients, right? That doesn't say stop bringing in revenue, but make sure your systems are in place. And it's interesting, because we do something similar for our clients, but we do it in completely different areas, right? So it's a really great conversation here, because we have the same goal in mind, right? So one of the things that I have never met an entrepreneur founder who has a job description. Because we don't. Because we grow into it and we just kind of know what to do, right? And then it was like, oh, I don't want to do this. I'm going to hire somebody to do this, which is great. But where I help a lot of clients is to get that clarity around the roles, especially if they have a number 2. So if it's a COO, or if it's an office manager, or if it's an integrator, if you're running on EOS, I don't know how big that is in Europe, but so it's like a duo, right? And very often, in order for the founder to really walk away and focus on those critical aspects of the business, they need somebody to run it. And then they give them authority and say, hey, this is your responsibility now. But more often than not, and I did this at the beginning, so it was the start of how we developed this process and how we overcame that. It's another part of the journey of how did I, what I call, offboard myself, and how do I help clients do that. We need to know not only what everybody's job description is, specifically on the leadership team, we need to know what ours is. And we need to know exactly how what we're doing impacts what everybody else is doing. And so early on, when I had my COO, it was going well, but then we were growing. And then I started like, oh, what about this? Oh yeah, we should do this, and shiny new idea. And how is this coming? And how are we with that? And eventually, because she was amazing, she sat me down and she said, Michèle, you're confusing me. And quite frankly, you're crushing my confidence. Have you noticed that I've been coming to you with more questions lately? And I'm like, yeah, I kind of want to talk about that too. And she said, it's because you keep questioning me. You keep asking me, where is this at? And basically, you're micromanaging me. I'm like, what? Me micromanage? No. I'm completely hands off. And she said, okay, write down everything that you think you're responsible for in your role. And I did. What I thought I was responsible for is half of her job description, even though I had written her job description, but I hadn't fully let go. And once we had that clarity, that's when we said, okay, I still want to be involved in this, but only on this level. Okay. So this is when we have a conversation about this. This is what I can completely let go of. And in order to have that confidence for me, I want you to report back on that one every week for the first couple of months so that we can get that confidence going so that I don't do that anymore. And that was basically the basis of what I now call the art of offboarding. And so that's the clarity that's created between the founder and the leadership team, which then when you have an exit or you're preparing for an exit, not only do you have the systems in place, but for whoever buys your company, they know exactly what their role is. And in my case, it was, oh, well, your role is already covered. Everything in your business runs without you. We just need to change the COO reporting to this person instead of to you, and everything runs. And so that's what got me the all cash deal. It's what got me a higher multiple. And when I say higher multiple to comparable companies. There were obviously companies who had much higher multiples. They usually had a software or some kind of something, right? Like a SaaS or something that you could scale. But in my case, no, I put out, I'm looking to sell. I had offers. I accepted one of them. 3 months later, the deal closed, all cash. I walked away. And I mean, they asked me to stay for a little bit, which I did, but I mean, I didn't really like, what am I going to do? Right? Like, you've already taken over my job, and I was just kind of there, like, if anybody has any questions or clients or something like that. But those systems and that delineation is, it's simple. It's not necessarily easy, but it is simple, and it's a game changer. And then working with a firm like yours, making sure the governance is in place, the contracts. I mean, anybody who's gone through due diligence knows if you don't have an amazing accounting firm that understands what you're doing, a great lawyer and great systems in place, it's going to turn your hair gray, right? It's a lot of work.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think it is really interesting how the two roles align, because a bit what you're doing probably is some form of the corporate governance because it's the control. So as an example, that person you're talking about, the leadership team, how the corporate governance and the finance would then, because I think people don't really understand the power of a finance team or what a real fractional finance team can do, because often accountants are just doing bookkeeping and tax, but not if you have a strategic finance team that actually work with you. Because what we would see as a control function would be, so for example, you have your leadership team, so you have your second hand, woman, man, you see, whatever it is. How you move it to the next level of controls would be, you'd say, right, they can sign off spend up to £10,000. So let's just say they can sign off. So that then starts meaning decision making on spending goes away from the owner. So obviously the owner has to decide what are they willing to give that person. So that person gets £10,000. So then therefore who in the business needs to know that they can only spend £10,000? Generally that's the finance team, because in the end it's the finance team that make the payments. So if you're going to have someone, so they would have £10,000 of spending limit, then you would say, right, so if you know you're going to spend it, do you know what budgets you have? So then it starts coming to budgeting and forecasting. This is where we'd call it like a bottom-up budget. So you would go down all of your codes, all of your spend, and go like, you can have up to £10,000 on all of these codes. So then that person is irresponsible for their budget. They build their own budget upwards, which is what we call bottom. They would build their budget, which is where the finance team comes in. They build it. You build it bottom down as the owner, potentially with some finance help, and then you can bridge the gap to see, do they think anything different to you? And then once they become responsible for that spend limit, then obviously they then have to manage that spend and make sure there's a sign-off process. So the owner might think to themselves, well, what if they spend more than £10,000? Well, sometimes you can't always have a control in the system that will stop them necessarily, unless you have a credit card where you've got a spend limit. Some of it comes down to trust. But then again, as long as you've got people in that process checking, so the finance team right at the end, if they got a purchase order that was more than £10,000 and it hadn't been approved, as an example, then they would know they haven't followed the process, and that's your control. So in the end, the spend might not happen without it. And that's where the governance and controls come in. So you have the accountability in your bit first, and then the controls and the governance comes in at specific points to make sure that those people are doing what they should be doing.
Absolutely. And it's so important. And the part where I work with clients is tying also those systems to KPIs, because if we're looking and like in my offboarding program, in my blueprint, so we don't just look at the responsibilities and the tasks, like we talk about delegating. That's a whole other rant. So many people delegate wrong, and it just leads to micromanagement instead of strategically taking the responsibility and offboarding it. They're just like delegating tasks all over the place. And then they wake up in the middle of the night stressed because they can't remember who they gave what to with which deadline. And then we're micromanaging all over the place. So I work on that as well. But, what's really important is as we go through that process, I talked earlier a little bit about value. How much value am I creating for the business? When I'm stuck working on things that I don't really love, it's going to take me longer. I'm not going to have the same kind of energy, right? It's going to also wear down the rest of my energy for the day, right? Which affects everybody. So getting clarity on what we're great at, what's our zone of genius, what we love doing, and what adds the most value, because there are a lot of things that entrepreneurs and founders love doing that really don't add any value, but they're doing it because sometimes it feels nice to tie a bow on it, right? Because we're always like looking into the future, but really looking at the value. And then the other part of it, which is really important, is which KPI is associated with this responsibility. And I'm always shocked to see job descriptions with things that people are supposed to be doing. There's no KPI. Why are they doing it? Okay. What's the point? Where does it add the value? And then last but not least, and this is where I also work with other companies, and accountants. I want the owner to understand which line item that responsibility affects. Does it go to revenue? Does it go to your bottom line, or is it a cost? So determining really where that value of the activity is. I mean, look, if you're running a $5 million business and you're working 60 hours a week, okay, I'm not going to show my work here, but you can do that math. Your time, 1 hour of your time is worth $1,600 approximately. Okay. So obviously that doesn't mean you're going to pay yourself that, because that's all your revenue. But what it does mean is that, in my opinion, your job as the founder and the CEO is to, one, know the value of your time. And that's revenue, right? Now, if we do from the bottom up, which I like to work with my clients, and I'm not an accountant, but just from a business perspective, don't set your goals by revenue, set them by what you want out of it and work the other way. But let's just stick with revenue. That means that's how much revenue you need to generate to keep this company at a $5 million company. And when I say you, I mean you. Because the value of your time is that. And if you're operating on a 50% gross margin or a 30% gross margin, you need to up that. So the question then becomes is, do I spend an hour training my sales team on how to close more deals. If one average deal is maybe worth $5,000, let's just say, or do I spend it trying to reconcile my bank statement, which I'm probably not good at, and I can pay some, you understand? Like it is, has a massive, you understand, has a massive impact on the potential for growth for your business, and getting clear not only what you're doing, but why you're doing it and what value does it create to which KPI and which line item. And that's where genius number people like you and, business advisors who have done it, we work together so well. And it's shocking sometimes how many entrepreneurs really don't know how to read a P&L and the balance sheet properly, and they can't see things. So, tying all of that together gives you a real blueprint of where you are in your business and what the value is. And you can do that with the rest of your team. If you have a CMO who's, whatever, posting social media that you can outsource, well, work on the strategy instead. Where's your value? Where's your value in the business?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a whole nother, we could do a whole nother episode of this, but as we're coming towards the end of the episode, I mean, it's such a great story, Michèle. I think you've done so well. I love hearing about it because it just resonates with me as well. Obviously, I'm earlier on in my journey, but maybe you can just share a little bit before we end about what you're doing now, and if anyone wants to reach out to you, like how they can do that.
Absolutely. Would love to. And I hope we get to work together on, with some clients in the future, because the pond has never stood between me and connecting with people. So that's kind of my legacy. So what I do now is I'm an executive coach and advisor. So I work with other entrepreneurs who want to work less, scale their business faster, to get the business ready for an exit, and to create value, to turn your business into an asset so that it runs without you, because that's where the magic is. At the end of the day, we only have one life. We can have 10 businesses. We can sell 10 businesses. But if we're not living our life and not buying back our time, as Dan Martell says, then what is it all for? So I work with entrepreneurs and help them really truly work on the business, create more value, and be able to get ready for a potential exit, or starting another business, or whatever they want to do. And I think my contact is in the show notes. If you do want to reach out to me, it's Michèle at michelehecken.com. And it's Michèle with one L. I know that's always confusing for people. So please, happy to reach out for me. I believe the contact is in the show notes. And when I do a podcast as a guest, I always do that. I always open up my calendar a little bit. Not a lot. I don't love it when people book into my calendar. That's kind of where I want to have my freedom of control, but I always do it. So I always open up a couple slots. So if you go in the show notes and you do want to book a time with me, there should be a link there.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Michèle, for sharing your story. And I just want to thank all our listeners. If you love our show, then hit the subscribe button so more people can find the episodes, and I look forward to seeing you soon.